Hey there, thinkers and learners. Waving hand, welcome to today's story. How to make smarter decisions. If you've ever made a choice and later thought, why did I do that? This story is for you. We all make hundreds of decisions every single day, from what to eat for breakfast to whether to take that new job, move to a new city, or say yes to a new opportunity. But what if you could learn to make those decisions smarter, not just faster, not just easier, but wiser? In this 10-part story, we'll explore how great thinkers, scientists, and even ordinary people train their minds to make better choices. You'll discover the psychology of decision-making, how emotions and biases secretly influence you, and how to create mental clarity even when life feels messy or uncertain. By the end of this series, you'll see how decision-making isn't just about logic, it's an art that combines reason, awareness, and intuition. So before we begin, make your first smart decision today, winking face. Backhand index pointing right, hit that subscribe button, give this story a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next parts. Your brain deserves the upgrade, and this story will help you unlock it. Now let's begin the journey of learning how to think deeper, choose wiser, and live smarter. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to always make the right choices? They know when to take risks and when to hold back. They know how to stay calm under pressure. And somehow, they don't panic when things go wrong. It's not luck, it's skill. Smart decision makers aren't born that way. They train their brains to understand how thinking really works. The human brain wasn't designed for modern decisions. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors faced choices like fight or run, eat or starve, stay or move. Today, we face hundreds of complex, abstract decisions, career moves, investments, relationships, goals, and our brains still use the same old survival systems. That's why emotions often override logic. Fear, excitement, and impatience sneak in, shaping our thinking before we even notice. But what if you could see your own thought process? What if you could step outside your emotions and watch how your brain decides, almost like observing your mind from above? That's what truly smart thinkers do. They learn to pause. They don't rush to answer. They create a mental space between stimulus and response. In that space lies wisdom. Here's a simple truth. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you interpret it. And your interpretation determines your choices. Imagine two people getting rejected from a job. One says, "I'm not good enough," and gives up. The other says, "Okay, what can I improve for next time?" That second person isn't smarter. They just made a smarter decision in how to think about failure. That's the foundation of this story. Smart decisions don't come from perfect information. They come from better thinking patterns. From learning how to slow down the rush of emotion, analyze reality, and act intentionally instead of reactively. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how to sharpen your judgment like a mental muscle, how to use logic and intuition together, how to identify hidden biases, how to make clear choices under pressure, and even how to trust your instincts when data alone isn't enough. So take a deep breath. You're about to learn a skill that can change your life more than any course, any tool, or any trick, because once you master how to think, everything else follows. Every day, we make choices that feel logical: what to buy, what to eat, how to respond, who to trust. But beneath those decisions, there's an invisible web of forces quietly steering us. Most of the time, we don't even notice them. Our brains like shortcuts, quick, automatic responses that save energy. They help us survive, but they also make us biased, emotional, and sometimes irrational. Let's start with something called cognitive bias. It's a mental filter, a habit of thinking that distorts how we see reality. There are dozens of them, but let's look at a few that secretly shape our daily lives. The first one is confirmation bias. It means you naturally seek information that confirms what you already believe and ignore what challenges it. Imagine you believe that working late means you're productive. You'll notice every time staying late helps, but forget the nights when you were just tired and inefficient. Confirmation bias makes us feel right instead of being right. And that's dangerous because it blocks learning. Smart thinkers fight this by doing the opposite. They actively look for what could prove them wrong. They ask, "What if I'm mistaken?" and listen carefully to answers that challenge them. Then there's the anchoring effect. Suppose someone tells you a jacket costs $300, but it's now on sale for $150. You might think you're getting a great deal, even though $150 could still be too much. Why? Because your brain anchored on the first number. It compared instead of evaluated. This happens everywhere, in shopping, in salary negotiations, even in judging people. The first impression sets the tone, and every next thought revolves around it. To make smarter decisions, you must recognize when you're anchored, and reset your reference point. Another bias is the availability heuristic. Your brain assumes that if something is easy to remember, it must be common or true. For example, after seeing a plane crash on the news, people start fearing flying, even though statistically, it's safer than driving. The brain gives weight to vivid stories, not accurate data. That's why emotions can overpower logic. Smart decision makers learn to pause and ask, "Am I reacting to facts or to feelings?" And then comes the sunk cost fallacy. Have you ever kept watching a boring movie just because you already spent an hour on it? Or stayed in a job you hate because you've already given it years? That's the sunk cost trap, the illusion that past effort justifies future effort. But sunk costs are gone. The only smart question is, if I were starting from zero, would I still make this choice? If the answer is no, then walk away. The smartest minds know when to stop digging. Here's the hard truth. Our brains weren't designed to make perfectly rational choices. They were designed to keep us alive, and sometimes that means trading truth for comfort. We jump to conclusions to feel safe. We ignore complexity because it's exhausting. But once you see these biases, you start to regain control. You begin to think about your thinking, and that's the moment real intelligence begins. So, what's the first step to making smarter decisions? Awareness. Notice when your emotions, your ego, or your fears are driving your choices. Step back. Breathe. Ask yourself, what's influencing me right now? The simple act of observing your thoughts changes everything. Because once you see the invisible strings that pull your mind, you can cut them. You stop reacting blindly and start choosing intentionally. And that's the first real step toward wisdom. Most people think smart decision-making means removing emotions, as if logic and feelings are enemies fighting for control. But here's the truth, emotions aren't the enemy. They're signals, powerful ones. When you understand them, emotions become a compass that can guide you toward better decisions, not away from them. Think of your emotions like the dashboard lights in a car. When something flashes red, it's not the car trying to ruin your trip, it's a message. Something needs attention. Fear, anger, excitement, joy, all these feelings are data. The problem is, most of us either ignore them completely or let them drive the car. Smart decision makers learn to read their emotions without being ruled by them. Let's take fear. It's one of the most misunderstood emotions. People see fear as weakness, but in truth, it's information. Fear tells you something matters. When you're scared to start a project, change your career, or speak up, it means the outcome is important to you. Fear doesn't always mean, don't do it. Sometimes it means, pay attention. The trick is learning to tell the difference between fear that protects you and fear that limits you. The first is instinct. The second is resistance. One keeps you safe. The other keeps you small. Then there's anger. We're told to control it, but anger also carries valuable truth. It often points to boundaries being crossed or values being violated. When used consciously, anger can become a motivator for change, not destruction. The key is to pause before reacting. Ask, what's this anger trying to tell me? Maybe it's time to speak up. Maybe it's time to walk away. Emotions are not orders, they're messages. And what about joy or curiosity? These are your inner green lights. When you feel deeply engaged, when your mind lights up with excitement or interest, that's your brain signaling alignment. It's saying, this is worth exploring. Smart decisions often start from curiosity. People who ignore what excites them end up chasing logic alone, and logic without emotion leads to burnout, not brilliance. But emotions can also mislead. Have you ever bought something expensive because you felt happy in the moment, and later regretted it? That's emotional hijacking. The brain releases dopamine, and your rational side shuts down. When emotion runs unchecked, it blurs your perspective. That's why emotional awareness is so powerful. It doesn't mean suppressing feelings, it means noticing them before they take over. Here's a simple mental exercise used by psychologists and great decision makers alike. Whenever you're about to make a big choice, pause and name what you feel. Literally say to yourself, I feel anxious. I feel excited. I feel pressure. Why? Because naming emotions moves them from the emotional brain, the amygdala, to the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex. It gives you distance. You stop being the emotion and start observing it. That small shift changes everything. There's also an underrated emotion called regret. People fear it, but regret, when used wisely, is one of the best teachers. Smart decision makers imagine future regret before acting. They ask, will I regret not doing this in a year? That question often clears away noise and reveals what truly matters. So the goal isn't to erase emotion, it's to integrate it. Logic gives you direction. Emotion gives you meaning. Without one, decisions become mechanical. Without the other, they become chaotic. The wisest minds learn to let both speak, and then decide from a place of balance. Because the smartest decision isn't always the most logical one. Sometimes it's the one that feels right in your core, after both your mind and heart have been heard. We live in a world that rewards speed, quick answers, instant reactions, snap judgments. From social media to business, everything pushes us to decide now. But here's the paradox. The faster you think, the more mistakes you make. The smartest minds know when to slow down. They understand that clarity doesn't come from speed, it comes from space. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky famously described two systems of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, emotional, automatic. It's what you use when you recognize a face, catch a falling glass, or finish a familiar phrase. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. It's what you use when solving a complex problem, planning a big move, or analyzing choices. Both are necessary. But most of the time, we're trapped in System 1, reacting before thinking. The art of smart decision-making begins when you learn to switch between them consciously. Think of System 1 as the sprinter and System 2 as the marathon runner. The sprinter helps in emergencies, when there's no time to think. But for important life choices, the marathon runner wins. Smart decision-makers know that slowing down is not a weakness, it's strategy. Let's imagine a situation. You receive a stressful email. Your instinct, System 1, wants to reply immediately, to defend yourself, to prove your point. But if you pause, just for a minute, you give System 2 time to step in. You breathe, reread, and notice that your emotional brain was ready to fight, not solve. That pause saves you from unnecessary conflict. The difference between a smart decision and a foolish one often comes down to one thing: the pause. This is what's called cognitive slowing. It means deliberately creating distance between event and reaction. Taking a few deep breaths, going for a short walk, or even writing down what you think before speaking. It might sound simple, but it's one of the most powerful tools of emotional intelligence. It turns impulse into insight. But here's the tricky part: our brains hate slowing down. Thinking deeply burns energy. That's why, when you're tired, stressed, or distracted, your brain switches to shortcuts. You start relying on intuition alone, making assumptions, or following habits. That's why fatigue leads to poor choices, not because you're less intelligent, but because your brain is conserving fuel. To make smarter decisions, protect your mental energy. Get enough sleep. Eat well. Move your body. Clarity requires energy, and a tired brain can't think clearly. Some of the world's top decision makers, from CEOs to pilots, follow routines that limit the number of decisions they make daily. They simplify small things so they can focus on the big ones. You've probably heard of Steve Jobs wearing the same outfit every day. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. One less choice meant more focus for meaningful decisions. Another key principle is thinking in slow motion. Before making an important decision, visualize it as if you're watching it unfold in slow speed. Ask yourself, what happens next? How might this go wrong? What would I think of this choice in 6 months? This mental slowdown brings hidden consequences into view. Slowing down also gives intuition time to speak. Intuition isn't magic, it's your brain processing patterns faster than logic can explain. But intuition needs quiet to be heard. When you rush, you drown it out with noise. When you pause, your subconscious reveals what logic alone might miss. So, next time you face a tough decision, don't rush it. Step back. Breathe. Write down your thoughts. Talk them out. The moment you slow your mind, your clarity grows. Because smart decisions aren't made in the storm, they're made in the calm that follows. The difference between average decision makers and great ones isn't intelligence, it's perspective. Smart thinkers don't just rely on what they know, they rely on how they think. They use something called mental models, frameworks that help simplify complexity and reveal the hidden logic behind reality. In other words, mental models are like lenses. The more lenses you have, the more clearly you see the world. Imagine two people looking at the same situation, say, a business losing customers. One says, "We need better marketing." The other says, "We need to understand human behavior." They'll take completely different actions, even though they're facing the same problem. That's the power of perspective, and mental models give you that power. One of the simplest and most useful models is first principles thinking, made famous by Elon Musk. Instead of reasoning by analogy, copying what others have done, you break things down to their most basic truths and build from there. For example, when Musk was told that building rockets was too expensive, he didn't accept it. He asked, "What are rockets made of?" "Aluminum, titanium, carbon fiber." Then he researched the raw material costs and realized the price of the parts was only a fraction of what companies were charging. By thinking from first principles, he built SpaceX differently, not from what was, but from what could be. Another powerful model is the inversion principle. Instead of asking, "How can I succeed?" ask, "What would guarantee failure?" This flips your thinking and exposes hidden risks. Want to make better health choices? Instead of asking how to stay fit, ask what behaviors would make you unhealthy, then avoid those. This reverse thinking clears away bad options and protects you from blind spots. Then there's opportunity cost, the idea that every yes is also a no to something else. Every decision costs time, energy, or focus. So before saying yes, ask yourself, what am I giving up? Many poor decisions come not from choosing the wrong thing, but from failing to realize what's lost in the process. Smart thinkers see trade-offs clearly. They know they can't do everything, so they choose wisely. A classic model from engineering and science is feedback loops. Positive feedback amplifies results, like a snowball rolling downhill. Negative feedback stabilizes systems, like your body regulating temperature. The same applies to life. Surround yourself with people who only agree with you, and you'll amplify mistakes. Seek constructive feedback, and you'll grow. Smart decision makers design feedback loops that keep them learning instead of stagnating. Another important one, second-order thinking. Most people stop at, "What happens next?" Smart thinkers go further. "And then what?" They anticipate long-term effects. For example, a company might lower prices to attract more customers. Sounds smart. But second-order thinking asks, what happens when profit margins shrink? What if competitors do the same? This deeper thinking prevents short-term fixes that create long-term damage. And let's not forget Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is often the right one. Our brains love complexity because it feels intelligent, but truth is usually elegant and simple. When in doubt, remove unnecessary assumptions. These mental models are like tools in a decision-making toolbox. The more you collect and practice, the sharper your reasoning becomes. But having tools isn't enough, you need to use them. The next time you face a tough choice, ask yourself, what are the first principles here? What would failure look like if I inverted the problem? What am I sacrificing by saying yes? What feedback am I missing? What happens next, and after that? Thinking with models doesn't make decisions effortless, but it makes them clearer. It gives you structure in chaos. Because life will always throw uncertainty at you, and mental models help you navigate it with calm confidence. When Daniel returned to work after his long reflective weekend, he noticed something curious. The office looked the same gray walls, the same hum of computers, the same faces buried in their screens. But something in him had shifted. The stress that once felt suffocating now seemed smaller. It wasn't gone, but it didn't control him anymore. That morning, his team gathered to discuss a client proposal. The stakes were high. The client was known for being demanding, and a single mistake could cost the company thousands. Daniel had two plans, one risky but innovative, and one safe but unimpressive. A week earlier, he would have chosen the safe one instantly. But today, he paused. Instead of asking, "What if it fails?" he asked, "What if it succeeds?" That small shift in framing, from fear to possibility, opened a completely new space in his mind. He realized how much of his decision-making had been shaped by avoidance, not aspiration. It wasn't that he lacked intelligence, he'd just been looking at problems from the wrong angle. Later that day, he met Maya for lunch at a quiet cafe near the park. She smiled when she saw the change in his expression. "You look lighter," she said. "I think I am," Daniel replied, stirring his coffee. "I realized most of my bad decisions came from being afraid to lose, to fail, to look stupid. But when I look at things differently, I see more options." "That's called reframing," Maya said. "It's one of the most powerful tools we have. The facts don't change, but your perspective does. And that changes everything." She pulled a napkin and drew 2 boxes. In one, she wrote, "Problem: we might lose the client if we take the risk." In the other, she wrote, "Opportunity: we might gain 10 new clients if this works." "The same situation," she said, "but 2 different frames. Which one do you think leads to smarter thinking?" Daniel laughed softly. "The second one. It makes me feel creative instead of scared." "Exactly. Most people don't need more data to make better decisions. They need better frames, mental lenses that help them see the whole picture, not just the fear." As they walked back, Daniel thought about how much his brain loved certainty. It always wanted to protect him, to keep him safe. But safety often came at the cost of growth. He began to see how his biases, loss aversion, overconfidence, fear of judgment, had silently directed his life like invisible strings. That night, he journaled again. "The smartest decisions aren't made by those who see more, but by those who see differently." The next morning, a new challenge arose. A client had rejected one of their proposals, and his team was frustrated. "We wasted 2 weeks," one of his colleagues groaned. "This was a disaster." Daniel stood quietly, thinking. Then he said, "What if it wasn't a disaster? What if it was data?" The room went silent. "What do you mean?" someone asked. "If we treat this rejection as information, a signal about what the client wants, then it's not a loss. It's feedback." And just like that, the team's mood shifted. The tension eased, and ideas started flowing again. Daniel realized that reframing wasn't just a mental trick, it was leadership. The ability to guide people's focus away from fear and toward learning was the real key to better decisions. Later that week, when Maya asked how the project went, Daniel smiled. "It didn't go as planned," he said, "but I think it went better than it could have. I'm starting to see that the way I think matters more than what I think." Maya nodded. "That's the essence of wisdom, not just having information, but having the right relationship with it." That night, Daniel sat by his window, watching the city lights blink in the distance. For the first time in years, he didn't feel pressured to have all the answers. He felt curious instead. The next part of his journey would test that curiosity, when a truly difficult, emotionally charged decision forced him to apply everything he'd learned. But for now, he simply breathed, grateful for one simple truth. Every problem changes the moment you change the way you see it. The following week, Daniel faced a challenge that would test everything he'd learned. It started with a sudden email, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. The subject line read, "Urgent, meeting with executive board tomorrow." The project he'd been leading for months was now under review. There were rumors that the company might cancel it due to underperformance. Daniel felt his chest tighten. His rational mind tried to stay calm, but his emotions were already taking over. He couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. That night, lying in bed, he kept replaying scenarios in his head. What if they blame me? What if I lose my job? What if I've made the wrong decisions all along? He realized, painfully, that knowing how to make smart decisions and actually doing it when emotions are high were two very different things. The next morning, he walked into the office early. The building was still quiet, the air cool and heavy with that faint smell of coffee and paper. He sat at his desk and took a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered. "Think." He remembered something Maya had once said, "When emotions rise, intelligence drops." It wasn't that emotions were bad, they were signals, but when they controlled your reasoning, even simple choices became distorted. He decided to take a few minutes just to write down what he was feeling. Angry. Scared. Frustrated. Embarrassed. Then he asked himself a strange question: what would I think if this weren't about me? He imagined he was an advisor, not the one being judged. How would he see the situation then? Immediately, the chaos in his mind began to quiet. He could finally see facts where before there had only been feelings. The project wasn't failing, it was just behind schedule. The client wasn't unhappy, they wanted clearer updates. His emotional brain had exaggerated everything, turning a manageable situation into a nightmare. When he walked into the board meeting the next day, he carried a calm confidence that surprised even himself. The executives asked tough questions, and instead of defending himself, Daniel listened. He acknowledged the problems honestly but presented clear plans for improvement. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just reacting, he was leading. After the meeting, one of the executives, a serious man named Collins, stopped him in the hallway. "That was impressive," he said. "Most people get defensive in there. You stayed composed." Daniel smiled slightly. "I wasn't composed last night," he admitted. "But I learned something. When you can separate emotion from logic, your decisions become 10 times clearer." Collins nodded. "You just learned one of the hardest lessons in leadership." That evening, Daniel met with Maya again at their favorite coffee shop. He told her everything, the panic, the fear, and how he pulled himself back. Maya listened carefully and then said, "That's emotional awareness. Most people ignore their feelings or let them take control. You did something different, you noticed them." Daniel thought about that. "So emotional control isn't about suppressing feelings?" "No," she replied. "It's about understanding them. You can't make smart decisions if you don't know what's influencing them. Fear, pride, anger, they're like filters that color how you see reality. Recognize them, and you can think clearly again." Daniel realized how often he'd let emotions decide for him, avoiding hard conversations, delaying bold moves, second-guessing his instincts. Emotions weren't the enemy, ignorance of them was. As he left the cafe, he walked slowly through the evening crowd, feeling more connected to himself than ever before. The city lights shimmered like a sea of choices, each one glowing, each one waiting. He smiled, because now he understood. The key to smarter decisions wasn't just about thinking better. It was about feeling better while thinking. And as he turned the corner toward home, he knew this was only the beginning. The next challenge would force him to balance logic and emotion in ways he never imagined, when a deeply personal decision arrived, one that no data could ever answer for him. A few months later, Daniel found himself facing a completely different kind of decision, one that no spreadsheet or flowchart could help him with. His company had just offered him a promotion, a higher salary, more responsibility, and the chance to lead a major international project. It was everything he had worked for. But there was a catch: he'd have to relocate to another country for at least 2 years. The offer came with excitement and pressure. Everyone congratulated him, saying he'd be crazy not to take it. But inside, Daniel wasn't sure. His parents were getting older, and his younger sister was going through a difficult time. Accepting the job meant being far from them when they needed him most. For the first time, his logical brain and emotional heart were pulling in completely opposite directions. That night, he sat by his window, the city lights flickering below like restless thoughts. He took out his notebook, the same one he used when he needed clarity, and drew 2 columns: reasons to go and reasons to stay. Under go, he listed growth, experience, new opportunities. Under stay, he wrote family, stability, balance. The 2 sides were almost equal. It was the kind of decision where logic couldn't decide, because both paths made sense. He remembered something Maya had told him. When logic can't decide, look for your values. They are the compass when reason and emotion disagree. He had never really written his values down before, so he started. Integrity. Growth. Connection. Family. Purpose. As he stared at the list, he realized something. All his professional success meant little if it disconnected him from what mattered most. That realization didn't make the decision easier, but it made it clearer. Still, clarity didn't silence the fear. The next morning, he went for a long walk in the park. He watched people jogging, kids playing, old couples sitting on benches. Everyone seemed to be living their lives without overthinking every step. He envied them, that quiet confidence that comes from simply knowing who you are. He sat on a bench and whispered to himself, "What would the wiser version of me do?" And suddenly an answer came, not as a thought, but as a calm feeling. Choose the life that lets you grow without losing yourself. That evening, Daniel called his parents. He told them about the offer and how conflicted he felt. His father laughed softly and said, "Son, you've always tried to make perfect decisions. But sometimes, the right decision isn't perfect, it's just honest." His mother added, "Do what helps you become who you're meant to be, not what looks best on paper." Their words hit deep. He realized that every smart decision he made so far came from listening, not just to logic, but to life itself. The next day, he walked into his boss's office. He thanked her for the opportunity and, with steady voice, said, "I've decided to stay." She looked surprised. "Are you sure? This could be career-changing." Daniel nodded. "It would be. But I need to invest in what matters most right now. I'll grow, just differently." She smiled, perhaps seeing something in him she hadn't before. "That's a rare kind of decision-making," she said. "Most people chase titles. You're choosing alignment." As he left the office, Daniel felt a strange peace. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. It wasn't the easier choice, but it was the truer one. And that's when he finally understood. The smartest decisions aren't always the ones that make sense to others. They're the ones that feel right to you, deep down, in the quiet space where your logic and heart finally agree. That night, as he looked out at the city again, Daniel smiled. Every light seemed softer now, as if the world itself approved. For years he had chased smart thinking. But now, he saw that intelligence wasn't about knowing everything, it was about knowing yourself. The next morning, he would wake up without uncertainty, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had learned to trust the one making the choices, himself. Weeks passed, and Daniel noticed something strange happening. His mindset was quietly changing everything around him. He wasn't making more decisions than before, but the way he made them had evolved. His confidence had deepened, not the loud kind that needs to prove itself, but the calm kind that listens, weighs, and then acts without regret. People around him started to notice too. Colleagues came to him for advice, not because he had authority, but because he had clarity. He no longer rushed to answer questions or react to problems. Instead, he paused, asked questions back, and gave thoughtful responses. One day, a junior analyst named Emma approached him nervously after a meeting. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" she said. "How do you always know what to do? You never seem unsure." Daniel smiled gently. "I'm unsure all the time," he said. "I just don't let uncertainty make the decision for me." She looked puzzled, so he explained. "Smart decisions aren't about knowing everything. They're about being comfortable with not knowing, and still moving forward." Emma nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. That moment reminded Daniel of himself a few years ago, constantly chasing certainty as if it were a prize. Later that week, during a strategy session, the team hit a wall. Two departments were in conflict over which project to prioritize, and the debate was growing tense. Daniel watched as frustration filled the room, everyone defending their side, no one listening. Finally, he raised his hand. "Can we pause for a second?" The room quieted. "Let's try this. Imagine we're one team trying to solve a shared problem, not two sides trying to win." The energy shifted immediately. People began to speak differently, less defensive, more cooperative. Within half an hour, they had a plan everyone supported. His boss later told him, "That was impressive. You didn't just make a decision, you made others want to decide together." That night, as Daniel walked home, he realized how powerful one person's clarity could be. It didn't just guide their life, it inspired others to think clearer too. Smart decisions, he realized, create ripples in workplaces, families, friendships. They build trust. They make people feel safe to speak, to think, to grow. He began to understand that decision-making wasn't just a personal skill, it was a social responsibility. But then something unexpected happened that put everything to the test again. His sister called one evening, her voice trembling. She'd been offered a chance to move abroad for her career, almost the same kind of opportunity Daniel had once turned down. But she was afraid of leaving their parents behind. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I'm scared I'll regret it." Daniel felt his heart twist. It was like hearing his own thoughts from the past. He took a breath and said, "You won't regret what's true to you. Forget what others think is right. What do you feel aligns with your values?" There was silence on the line. Then she said softly, "I think I need to go." Daniel smiled. "Then go. I'll take care of everything here." When they hung up, he felt both proud and emotional. His decision months ago had started something he didn't expect, a chain reaction of courage. By choosing authenticity for himself, he had given others permission to do the same. The following weekend, as he sat in a quiet cafe, Daniel wrote a note in his journal. "Smart decisions aren't about avoiding pain. They're about choosing meaning." He realized how far he had come, from a man chasing perfection and certainty to someone who understood that life's best choices often come wrapped in uncertainty and fear. The difference was that now, he trusted his process. He no longer looked for the right answer, he looked for the honest one. He closed his notebook and stared out the window. The world outside felt bigger now, but instead of intimidating him, it inspired him. Because for the first time, Daniel understood something simple yet profound. Every decision, no matter how small, shapes who you become. The question is never, "What should I do?" but, "Who do I want to be?" And that realization would carry him toward one final lesson, one last truth about decision-making that would tie everything together. Months later, Daniel stood at a crossroads again, not a professional one this time, but something deeper. Life had slowed down. The project he'd stayed for was complete, his sister was thriving abroad, and his parents were doing well. Yet Daniel felt a quiet emptiness growing inside. For so long, he had focused on making smart decisions, logical, thoughtful, balanced, that he'd forgotten something simple. Decisions weren't just about outcomes, they were about living. He started wondering, am I choosing what truly makes me feel alive, or just what makes sense? One evening, he decided to take a weekend trip alone to the countryside. He rented a small cabin near a lake, no Wi-Fi, no noise, just silence. On the first night, sitting by the fire, he pulled out his old notebook again. The pages were filled with lessons, reflections, quotes, and checklists. He smiled. It was like reading a map of his growth. But then he turned to a blank page and wrote one question at the top. What does a fulfilled decision look like? He stared at it for a long time. And slowly, an answer formed in his mind. A fulfilled decision is one where the heart and mind shake hands. He realized then that every part of his journey had been preparing him for this, not to become perfect at decision-making, but to become whole. Intelligence had given him clarity, emotion had given him depth, and reflection had given him peace. The secret wasn't to suppress one part, or overuse another, it was to balance them. The smartest decisions, he now understood, are not coldly calculated. They are warm with purpose, guided by both logic and compassion. The next morning, he woke up early and walked to the edge of the lake. The water was still, mirroring the soft sunrise. As he watched the light spread across the horizon, Daniel felt a quiet certainty, not about what he would do next, but about how he would do it. From now on, he wouldn't chase the illusion of a perfect life. He would choose courage over comfort, meaning over approval, growth over fear. Because that, he realized, was what smart really meant, not being right, but being real. When he returned to the city, everything looked the same but felt different. The noise, the pace, the pressure, it didn't overwhelm him anymore. He walked through it calmly, knowing that clarity wasn't something he had to search for outside, it lived within him now. At work, his leadership deepened. He listened more, judged less, and made decisions with empathy and precision. At home, he became more present, more open, more patient. People started saying there was something about him, a sense of grounded wisdom that drew others in. But Daniel didn't feel wiser, he just felt aligned. One evening, as he was leaving the office, Maya called. They hadn't spoken in a while. So, she said with a teasing tone, have you finally mastered decision-making? Daniel laughed. No, he said. But I've learned to make peace with it. Maya chuckled. Then you've mastered it more than most. They talked for a while, about life, choices, and how every decision, big or small, shapes the story we tell ourselves. Before hanging up, Maya said something that stayed with him. Smart decisions don't guarantee a perfect life, Daniel. They just help you live one that's truly yours. That night, Daniel wrote one final note in his notebook, the last line in a long journey of learning. A smart decision is one that connects your reason to your humanity. He closed the notebook and placed it on his shelf, not as a guide, but as a reminder that wisdom grows quietly in those who dare to think deeply and feel fully. And as the city lights shimmered outside his window, Daniel smiled. For the first time in years, there were no questions left in his mind, only a deep, peaceful understanding. Life would bring more choices, more doubts, more crossroads. But whatever came next, he knew he was ready. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned the most important truth of all, that the smartest decision you can ever make is to live with intention, courage, and heart. If you enjoyed this story and it helped you think differently about life and choices, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's standing at their own crossroads. Remember, every decision is a chance to grow wiser, kinder, and more true to yourself. Until next time, think deeply, choose bravely, and live wisely.